Maebh O Regan works in the Art and Design, Royal College of Art and Design in Dublin, and our interest is in contemporary Irish studio. You're going to do a quick short presentation, and then we're going to open it up and discuss the work.
This is a new collection of work by the artist Bernie Masterson, and it comes in 3 parts, and I'm going to play you the audio-visual part first, which is the last part, and then I'll explain how the work came about and what exactly it entails. So this is the lady in question, and you can also see a wonderful portrait which is painted by her daughter Bernie. Now this body of work came about really because her daughter was caring for this elderly lady, and like all of us, you know, when you look in the mirror you sort of begin to think, oh God, is that really me? And she was looking at a scar and she was questioning it. And obviously being a practicing artist, Bernie had a look at it and she thought, that's actually quite beautiful if you look at it, you know, in an abstract way. And she made a sketch. And this evolved into something that was the first section of the work. And we're going to look at the work in a moment. But I want to tell you a little bit about Bernie Masterson. She trained in Limerick Art School. You can see as you look around you just how accomplished she is. But what might surprise you is the fact that she's primarily known as a landscape artist. She interprets the landscape, and this is one of her pieces. It was exhibited last year in 2010. So just looking at the subdivision of the work, and you'll be able to look at this in more detail when you walk around the room and look at the pieces. The first part of the work is very organic, and it's almost abstract, and it's only when you look at certain pieces that they remind you of body parts. But if you came in and saw part 1 of the work, you would very likely think that they're beautiful organic pieces and not really take the ideas a little bit further. The second part is very filmic, and these deal with the post-mortem. The first part we can say is collaborative, because her mother was a very sparky individual and she was delighted to participate in this, documenting various areas in her own flesh. And then after her mother died, Bernie didn't feel that the work was over. She wanted to take it further, but she had brought up the subject with Jenny before that, and Jenny gave her permission to use her x-rays, and she looked at it in another way. So the second part is quite filmic, and the third part is the interdisciplinary piece that you've just looked at. So looking at the first one, you'll notice that a lot of the names, I think naming pictures is very important. Some artists, you know, this is a total cop-out, you know, they sort of say Untitled 1, Untitled 57, and, you know, that might sound very cool, but actually when you're trying to establish what picture they're referring to, it's very useful to have a name or a title. And I think that putting a correct title gives you an insight into the mindset of the artist. And when you look at the first set of images here, we can see that she's looking at the landscape of the skin to a certain extent, and she's applying the ideas that she would apply to the landscape. These are oil and canvas, and they're quite small in scale. As you can see, they're 35 inches square. She doesn't place them in the center of the canvas. She places the image almost as if it's a medical slide. There's that aspect to it as well. But I just thought that this particular image of the flesh here, if you compare it to, say, the bark of a tree, you get this lovely lyrical approach to it. And the second piece is Threshold, and this is looking at an injury. And even if we look at the palm of our hands, or if we look at any area of the skin in detail, you can see similar lines are drawn, and I'm comparing it here with a leaf. I think this one had a particular resonance for me because it's very recognisable, Jenny's left foot. But what is distinctive about it is the fact that she had an accident when she was quite young, a bicycling accident, and that affected her big toe. And it's almost, you know, divided in two. And this big toe was one of the items that she had to write down on her passport when she was in England during the Blitz and when she was working as a nurse. You had to have identifying marks, and this was her identifying mark. And to some extent, I know that my mother has a cockle shell toe, as she calls it. Somebody stood on her toe, and it has this unusual approach. And I think, you know, it's these sort of things that we remember from childhood, these little unusual marks on your parents and on the human body. The other reason that it sort of caught my attention is the fact that it fits in very nicely with the artist Frida Kahlo, the Mexican surrealist painter. And I'll be talking about Frida Kahlo again. Now, Frida Kahlo had an accident when she was quite young. She was 18 years of age, and it damaged her right foot in this case. And here you can see this image by Frida Kahlo. She talks about what the water gave me. And it's this idea of, you know, the 2 feet propped up in the bath and various things that are happening around her. You have this portrait, photographic portrait of her parents that she has reconstituted, and there are various different activities. You know, you get the fact that she has bidirectional sexual orientation and other aspects of her life, like her life in America, etc., all referenced in this image. This is another fascinating image. It's just age spots, if you like. But this has to do with the imagination of the artist and the ability to interpret something and to look at something and to see it as almost like a map of the Milky Way, the stars in the sky, and not to look at the negative. And I think that this is something that you find with both the artist, something she obviously inherited from her mother. You know, when her mother took the fact that her own mother died in childbirth, and she used that as a way forward into medicine and a way forward into making other people's lives better. This, again, is Bernie taking her mom's ideas and looking at the body and interpreting it in an interesting and an engaging manner. So that was the first part, and the first part is collaborative, and I think the fact that it was a collaborative collection. There are 16 pieces. We've only got a selection of them here on show today, and there are 16 pieces in the first section. And then she felt that she should go on and she should develop this work, and she should look at the architecture of the human body and the whole idea of somebody taking a photograph of your interior, which is quite amazing when you think of it. I mean, it happens all the time, but you're looking at the framework beneath the skin. And with that, she looked at these images, and I'm sure those of you who are involved in the medical profession here will be very aware of, you know, you take an image and you're really looking at it from a scientific point of view. You're not always looking at the person. But Bernie has managed to contextualize it by placing in the margins images that were important in her own lifetime. And these are very appropriate. They're sort of hidden or coded, if you like, because they're the old negatives. And think about somebody who's, you know, her florit, as we'd say in artistic terms, when her family was young and when things were really happening to her, would have been very much in the time of black and white photography, and she's using that, and yet it's just there in the corner, quietly making its own statement. I was looking at this, and it dawned on me that it's very much like this wonderful study of an elderly man by Annie Leibovitz. And she's a very famous photographer. She works for Rolling Stone. She's the person who photographed John Lennon in the final photograph of John Lennon lying in the fetal position on top of Yoko Ono was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. It was photographed just 2 hours before John Lennon was killed, shot dead. But I thought that it made a nice parallel with this piece as well. And she looked at, you know, CAT scans and the interior working of the human body. And here we have a pin. This is a medical intervention, and it looks so intrusive, really. I know it acted as a very important support, and it was a life-giving and life-changing event, but when you look at the delicacy of the framework and the depth, I think she's managed to achieve great depth in the images themselves. And then you've got this intrusive intervention, yet a wonderful intervention into the body. And this is another parallel which has little pictures that you'll have to look at in detail to see them more clearly. So the third part then was, after she had completed working on these filmic sources, and she juxtaposed the very personal family photographs with these very clinical images that came from medical resources, she moved on and she decided to make the final piece. And the final piece, I think, is a fascinating piece, because what she did is she combined the images in a slideshow, and she was trying to find a way to express, I suppose, the reversal of the womb situation. If you think about it, as a child in the womb, we all are used to hearing voices. And in order to do this, she put in that layered voice to echo that. And to some extent, it's like she's trying to forge an umbilical cord, and she's going back into the genetic memory, and she does this through the layering of the human voice. And it's a little bit like role reversal. The mom is there with the baby in the womb, and now the mom has moved on to another spiritual dimension, and she is still connecting. So when you look at this body of work, you're sort of trying to fit it into a genre and see how it works in other areas. And what I've done is I've just taken 3 images of death and just I thought to contextualize it to some extent. This is one of the most powerful images that I have seen in relation to death, and it comes from the French Revolution, basically. The artist is Jacques-Louis David, and David was from an aristocratic background. A defining feature in his life was the fact that his father was shot dead in a duel when he was 9 years of age, and that seemed to characterize how he was going to go forward. Even though we have the victim lying there very much like the Christ in the Pieta. In the background, in reality, the bathtub was set against classical columns, and you had wallpaper with trellising and little birds in it and things like that. But of course you had to edit all those things out, make it very dramatic. And one of the things when you see this picture is the chiaroscuro, this light and shade and the drama of the piece. And it is a very chilling piece. And that, I think, is one of the first images of death that I think comes to mind whenever I think about it, apart from all the religious imagery. Another artist that's famous for her images of death is, of course, the Mexican surrealist painter Frida Kahlo. And the final piece in relation to death that I'm going to look at today is this piece here. And this relates to Brian O'Doherty. Brian O'Doherty was a medical man. He was born in Roscommon in 1934. He attended Trinity College. He gained his degree in medicine in 1952. From there, he went on to do cancer research, and he worked in Cambridge University, and from there he was invited to go on and to work in Harvard. He became involved in making art, he became involved in art criticism, and he became a very important broadcaster in the field of art. So just to finish up, I thought that I would give you just a note on the title of the work, because I think it's a very interesting choice of words, drawing on the body, but it has a huge resonance for people involved in the history of art in particular, because drawing the human body was an enormous part of art practice. The final slide really shows you how this is all reversed, and this is a very exciting new time, and especially from an Irish perspective. So I think when you look at this collection, I think it does challenge our perceptions on a universal issue. And Bernie Masterson is somebody who is famed for her work of documenting the landscape, and in this case, I think that she has successfully documented the human heart. Thank you.